What I'm trying to say is that the Longines Legend Diver is just different. When it comes to luxury watches in the industry, luxury diving watches, a couple instantly spring to mind. You have the Omega Seamaster, Longines Hydro Conquest, Oris Aquest, Rolex Submariner. These are all things that just roll off the tongue. But then you get to this, the Longines Legend Diver, and it's just so different. The fact of the matter is, to find a vintage-inspired diving watch in today's industry is increasingly getting harder. I mean, it's because of the popularity of sports watches, like your Omega Seamasters that I've got on at the moment. These are becoming increasingly rare. And with all that said, what we are going to do today is talk a little bit about the Longines Legend Diver. This is the black version, it's my personal favorite. Let's get into some specs. The case on this model is made from stainless steel and it has black PVD coating, which gives it that black stealthy appearance. It comes in at 42 millimeters in diameter, but because the bezel is integrated into the face, it does wear a little bit larger. It's actually quite funny that the black looks and feels that little bit bigger, and because normally black is used to camouflage size. So sometimes when you have a bigger watch, they'll make it black so that it looks slightly smaller. What is that? That alarm just totally interrupted my rant. So we're gonna move on to more of the specs. So the thickness of this model, I've got my tools here, comes in at 12.7 millimeters. Now this is actually a lot thinner than normal diving watches, for example, my Omega Seamaster. It comes in a more vintage feel. That slenderness gives it that more vintage feel is what I would say. I know I just said that this is a lot thinner than other diving watches. It's actually only 1 millimeter thicker, or thinner rather, than my Omega Seamaster that I've got on. But when you come to luxury watches and diving watches in particular, that millimeter means a lot. And depending on how high it sits in the wrist, depending on how big and chunky it feels, it just means a lot. The lug to lug of this model comes in at 50 millimeters, or maybe just over 50 millimeters, which is actually quite surprising to me. That's the same, I know I keep comparing to my Omega Seamaster, but they're both diving watches, so it fits. That's the same as my Omega Seamaster, and they don't look the same. The lugs on this one are more elongated, and the bracelet or the strap doesn't fit against the case like my Omega Seamaster, so I just wouldn't expect that. Now we get to the weight of this model. So we're going to put it on the scales at the moment, and it comes back at 111 grams. It's interesting actually, because online it says it's 109 grams, but on our scales it's 111. I trust our scales. Before we move on to the dial and the look and feel of this watch, it's important to say that this was inspired from the 60s variants of the diving watches in the Longines range. So I do like the fact that it has that history and it's kept that heritage feel through the years. The original watches were actually only water resistant to 100 meters, so there's obviously been a big upgrade, and obviously a big upgrade in the movements as well. On the subject of that vintage look and aesthetic and history, we get to the dial. Now, what I like about the dial is that the indices and the numerals are actually sort of a tanned color. They're not pure white, which follows through on that vintage heritage feel. Then we get to the hands, which are actually polished silver, and they play wonderfully against that black lacquer dial with the tanned kind of indices and numerals. So it's a really good combination. I actually really like what they've done here. However, there is one gripe that I'm gonna have to say. The date window's at 3 o'clock. And I know I keep going on about this. It's not for everyone, but I just prefer the date window at 6 o'clock. It just adds that symmetry to me. And I think this would be so perfect if they moved it. On the subject of that date window, I do understand why they kept it at 3 o'clock. It's to remain true to their roots, remain true to the history. So I get it. One thing that Longines did do is they actually discontinued the no date version of this. And I think this would look stunning with no date. So if any of you have the no date version, let me know in the comments. Looking at the general aesthetic of this watch, it has quite an iconic look to it. You wouldn't really confuse this with anything else. It is definitely a Longines Legend Diver. I mean, when you look at this, you would not think it's anything different, and that's because of the two crowns on the right-hand side. The two crowns on the right hand side, the top one here controls the bezel on the inside of the watch underneath the domed sapphire crystal glass. The second one obviously controls the time and the date. I really, really like it. The bezel, or not the bezel, the crowns aren't too intrusive. When you bend your wrist, a lot of the time watches can have too sharp a crown, I would say, whereas these fit really, really nicely. Another feature that makes this unmistakably a Longines Diver or Longines Legend Diver is the bezel on the inside of the domed sapphire crystal glass that we covered. And let's get into that, or dive into that a little bit further. I really, really like it. And the reason that I like it is, well, functionally, when a diver's under the water, it's a lot easier for them to bump a bezel than it is to unscrew a crown and change it. So actually, functionally, it kind of works. And then another point, a personal point, is that when I was in school, I had quite bad ADD. And what I would do is I would sit and I'd do this in class. But now that it's on the inside of the bezel, that's not a temptation. On the subject of bezels, this is totally subjective. If you've seen my watch collection video, and I'm going to link up here if you want to see it, I tend to go for things that are a little bit different, and maybe that's why I'm attracted to the bezel on the inside of the domed sapphire crystal glass, but it's totally up to you. I don't think there's a right and wrong answer here. I just think there's what you prefer. So let me know in the comments if you'd go for a twisty bezel with a clicky noise that's really satisfying, or you'd go for the bezel on the inside of the domed sapphire crystal glass. On the subject of the Longines Legend Diver, I need another coffee, so give me 2 seconds. Oh yes, how good does this look? Right, let us move on. So what we are going to do now is take a look at the lume. So we're just gonna shine that on that for a sec. You would have seen just there that the lume, of course, isn't everywhere, but there is a splash of lume on the bezel, which makes this a fully functional dive piece. Another little detail that I quite like on the dial, and it carries on the vintage theme, is the word automatic is in almost scripted text. It's quite different. I really, really like it. It kind of, yeah, as I said, it plays to that vintage theme. Then you get to the case back. It's not an open case back, it is closed. It is also black PVD coated, and it has the symbol of the diver on it. I actually quite like it. It sits quite nicely on the wrist. It feels cold to touch. Yeah, I quite like it. Moving on to the strap before we get onto the automatic movement. The strap sits a lot differently to my Omega that I have on, and I know I keep comparing the two, but stick with me here. It doesn't hug the watch face as much as my Omega. With my Omega, there's no gap between the strap and the face. It sits comfortably between the lugs, whereas in the Longines, there is a gap. I've actually seen this strap on NATO, or in NATO, and I love it. I actually do prefer the NATO, but again, that's just my personal preference. Before we move straight on to the movement, it's important to say that I'm going to give you a little bit of insight about our process here at Chisholm Hunter. Basically, Drew and I will look online and we'll walk around the arcade and we'll see what watches we think are cool, which ones really excite us. And we will print them off, we'll print a picture of them off, and we'll put them on my desk, or I'll put them on Drew's. Drew put a picture of this watch on my desk, and I wasn't sure what to feel. I didn't know whether it was a dive watch or maybe more on the vintage side. It was middle ground to me. But then I went into the store after Drew's guidance, and I tried it on. Obviously, Chisholm Hunter are official authorized retailers for Longines. So I tried it on in the NATO strap, and it sat beautifully on the wrist. It was a perfect combination of vintage and a functional tool watch. And on that note, that is what this channel will remain. Drew and I are two people that have a love and passion for watches, and that's what this channel is. It's showing them to the world and showing how incredibly unique these timepieces can be. So if you want to join the journey, join the Chisholm Hunter journey on YouTube, then make sure you hit that subscribe button. The movement in this piece is the L888 movement. This has 72 hours of power, and for the price, that's pretty good. The movement in this piece beats at 25,200 vibrations per hour, and of course is a self-winding movement. Now we get to the price. We get to the crux of most watch purchases. I say this in every video, but it's because it's true. This comes in at £2,230 for this strap version. And let's go back to the title of this video. It's a different dive watch. It's something you don't find every day. It's something that's becoming increasingly rare in the industry. It remains functional, but doesn't lose any style by doing so. I'm a fan. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Time on the Wrist at Chisholm Hunter. If you want to join the Chisholm Hunter watch community, make sure you subscribe here. If you want to see the watch vlog, where we take some insane watches like this to incredible locations, make sure you click here. And if you want to see more from Longines, make sure you click here.